Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Arachaim, Hilchot Kriyat Shema, and we are up to Siman Ayin Chet, Mishinisrach Latin Mayim B'Shat Kriyam, Ubo Seif Echad. This is on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph of the regular prints of Mishna Berurah. Maran writes, Haya Koreh v'itchin miraglav shotetin al birkav, posek ad sheichlu hamayim v'chozer likrot. If a person is saying Shema and he started urinating, sometimes you have, physically speaking, you have two muscles that control the urine, and one of them is automated basically without you thinking, and the other one is more in a person's control. And reasons of age or sickness could affect the control over those muscles. And sometimes you have this, older adults, you could have situations that they have a catheter, and they could have meraglayim shotetin. Now, if it's going to be without a catheter, in the olden days they didn't have that, or even nowadays for someone that for whatever reason has lost control, and it starts dripping on his thighs, you stop until it finishes, then you go back to reading Shema. As the halacha has it, we had this in Gemara Masechet Brachot Daf Chaf Bet, and says the Shulchan Aruch, Im naflu al bikadav v'yesh b'hem tofeach al latpiach, even if you have a situation that your beged has absorbed the urine in a way that it would make other things wet to the degree that they could be wet enough to affect other things, still you would be able to say it, because it is mechusim bebigdo, because it's covered with the beged. Now, within this, you have a machloket acharonim. What does this exactly mean? Does it mean that your undergarment is wet, but your top cover is dry, and that is what the cover is that the Shulchan Aruch refers to? Or is it that even if you have the outer beged wet with meraglayim, still, because it is covered, it's not a puddle, is not something that you see meraglayim be'en, still will be mutar to say Shema. That is the simple understanding of the Shulchan Aruch, the latter one. But nevertheless, it is the machloket within the poskim, as we will see. Ve'im naflu meraglayim ba'ares, but if he now created a puddle, you actually see meraglayim on the ground, that already is a different level. Marchik mem arba amot. You have to distance yourself 4 amot from that before you continue Shema. The Ramah adds, we will have later on in Siman Pebet, it is that if they are already absorbed in the ground, if you have afar tichoach, or in any other case that they are absorbed in the ground, then it will be mutar to read Kriyat Shema, even though that you see the wetness, so to speak, on the ground. Says the Shulchan Aruch, if you stop, paused enough time that it would take you to say the entire Shema. For instance, it would say it shouldn't take you less than 5 minutes to say Shema, 4 minutes to say Shema. If it takes you 5 minutes to say Shema, if you waited 5 minutes, so even though that you were in the middle of Shema, it took 5 minutes, says the Shulchan Aruch, you still will go back to the place that you paused. You don't have to go back to the beginning of Shema, and that is something that the Ashkenazim, the Ramah, disagrees with this Maran. So it becomes machloket Maran and Ramah. The Ramah brings those who disagree and say, if you waited 5 minutes and it takes you but 5 minutes to say the entire Shema, so even though that you were in the middle, you have to go back to the beginning of Shema. And Ramah writes that v'chen ikar. Yesh omrim d'imshak deligmor et kulah chozer lerosh v'chen ikar. That's what the Ramah paskins. So those are the basic halachot that we explained. The previous shiur as a quick recap, and as we mentioned before, there are certain halachot. The Kaf Chaim, for instance, says that the beged elyon was not nitlachlech. The Chafetz Chaim writes that you have a top cover in the case that the urine has been soaked, the baguette, the garment of a person has been soaked with urine. That is only when the undergarment is wet, but the top cover is dry, says the Mishna Berurah. So the Kaf HaChaim says that the Shulchan Aruch is not referring to that. The simple understanding of the Shulchan Aruch is that even if your outer baguette is like that, it will be considered still mutar. But says the Kaf HaChaim a chumrah as well. Right? So the Kaf HaChaim, this is only because you're smack in the middle of the reading of the Shema. If you are starting to say Shema, even if your undergarment is wet with meraglayim, you're not allowed to read the Lechatchila. Even though that you have a dry cover on top, you cannot read Lechatchila. You would have to go change or wait until it dries or whatnot. You cannot read when you have soaked meraglayim in the underwear. Lechatchila asur likro ksheyesh meraglayim al begadav. Right? Again, this is a level that's tofeach al minad la'atpiach. It's not talking about the case that the person has a drop of meraglayim absorbed in the beged. We're talking about the beged that is so soaked with meraglayim that if you touch it, your finger will be wet enough to affect wetness on something else. So that's not a daily occurrence. All right, this is an accident type of thing, or for elderly individuals and so on. Next Siman, the Shulchan Aruch discusses in Siman Ayin Tet, Mission is the melo so'a b'shat kriya. Now, if you're saying Shema, as we mentioned before, all these Simanim, even though that we speak about meraglayim and so'a in regards to saying Shema, but really it applies to brachot and tefillah as well, as we will explain when we develop the Siman. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Hayta so'at adam ma'acharav. This is a Gemara in the same perek in Daf Kaf Hey. We had this in Amud Aleph, Masachet Brachot. The Shulchan Aruch says if you have so'at adam, we're talking about human excrement, because the reason the Shulchan Aruch says this because not every so'ah has a halachic din of so'ah. As we will see later, there are certain animals, certain so'ah that is equivalent of so'at adam, but much of what we have exposed to in our society is so'at kilavim, and that is not necessarily the same halacha as so'at adam. So this becomes actually very relevant, that not every excrement is considered so'ah in a halachic perspective. So says the Shulchan Aruch, Hayta so'at adam ma'acharav, sarich litrachek 4 amot mimakom shkala reach. So we mentioned, the pasuk says, Vayam macharecha kadosh. Your machane has to be, your immediate surrounding has to be kadosh, for saying devarim shebi kedusha. So therefore, you cannot say Shema when your immediate surrounding has dirtiness in it, halachic dirtiness, which would be so'ah. Now, this, when it's an uncovered so'ah, would apply not just to be farther than 4 amot radius from the so'ah itself, but from the area that the so'ah affects. So therefore, if you have so'ah and the smell of it emanates another 10 feet around it, so the entire 10 feet diameter or radius would be considered the place of so'ah. You have to distance yourself 4 amot. Your 4 amot is your machane. Your machane has to be kadosh. So therefore, even though that I stopped smelling it at already inch 1 after 10 amot, after 10 feet rather, that fact that I don't smell anymore, that's all, and I don't see it because my back is to it, that's not sufficient, because my machane is not kadosh. 4 feet away from me, 4 amot away from me, 6 feet away from me, is within the smelly radius of the that is not machanecha kadosh. So therefore, your 4 amot radius, your machane entirely has to be outside the area affected by tzoah. Hence, the Shulchan Aruch that says 4 amot mimakom shekala hareach. You have to distance yourself 4 amot, 6 feet, away from the place that the smell stops. Afilu im yesh, even though that you have lo choli she'eno meriach, even if you had just experienced corona, and you don't smell anything. You don't smell anything, but you know that the smell is there because the next guy next to you is still holding his nose. So then you still have to go away from it because it's not dependent on you. If you smell something, that affects your halakha. As we will see later on, we're going to divide reach ra sheyesh lo makor, reach ra she'en lo makor, a bad odor that has source or doesn't have an actual source exposed. But even those that doesn't have a source exposed, oftentimes you would be challenged with saying Devarim Shebiktusha, as we will see. But over here is not just a matter of you not being able to say bracha because you're experiencing a bad odor, but here is a lack, a chisaron of v'haya machanecha kadosh. Your machane is not kadosh when your surrounding is in that area. So therefore, it's nothing dependent on whether or not you could smell it or you can't smell it. If you know that this area smells bad because of a mekor, because of a source of bad odor, that's not considered machanecha kadosh, and hence you cannot do it.
I was going to say, there's those who obviously have better sense of smell than others as well, right? So are we saying it's only if you know for certainty that it smells as opposed to, us?
Well, if you're smelling it, it goes after you. If you don't smell it, it goes after the majority of people. That's says the Shulchan. A second halacha. Sarich leitrachel 400 makom sheyichle areach lemi shemeriach. Sarich leitrachel. You have to. Sorry, this is just finishing up the sentence. We didn't finish it yet before. That you have to distance yourself, even though that you can't smell. 400 from the place that the smell stops for a person that could smell. Umilefanav sarich larchik meloinav. The second halacha is if it's in front of you. This is when the tzoah is behind you, so you can't see it. But if you could see it, then sarich larchik meloinav. You have to distance yourself meloinav as much as you can see it. Still is a problem. Now remember that this is within the same domain. If the tzoah is covered, then you don't have a problem, right? Because tzoah ba'ashashit is not an issue. We mentioned before, erva ba'ashashit is a problem because by erva, the pasuk hinges a problem for seeing. Velo yira'eh becha ervat davar v'shav ma'acharecha. So there, the pasuk says, seeing it is a problem. So I don't care if you're in a different domain, you're in a different house, there's a glass, and over the glass you see erva, that's a problem. You cannot say Devarim Shebiktusha in front of erva. But by tzoah, it says what? V'haya machanecha kadosh. It's not. It has nothing to do with sight necessarily if it's not in your machane. So the question really is, what is considered your machane? Afilu balayla, and that is even balayla where you can't necessarily see, but it is within sight because it's not covered and it's not in a different domain. And the Rama adds, or if a person is a suma, if a person is blind and naturally he cannot see, you would have to still distance yourself to the degree that had it been light during the day, you would not be able to see it. If it's on your side, then it's like in your behind you, which will be 400 from the place that the reach stops. Now, so let's study this a little bit together to gain a little better understanding. This is one of the more complicated things. If you take a look, you have a very large Biur Halacha here trying to explain the yesodot of the sugya, and he actually comes up with 10 different levels of halachot of soah, and it's a little beyond the scope of our talk. For those who are more advanced, I highly encourage they should read the Biur Halacha. This is one of the important Biur Halachas in all the simanim that we discussed, the halachot of soah. Again, we try to bring in the piskei halachot as they pertain to our sugyot going on, but nevertheless, the basic explanation of the sugya we will do, and that is the Chafetz Chaim writes, So'at Adam afilu en magia mimena reach ra. If you have So'at Adam, if you have human excrement, even if it has no smell whatsoever, you don't feel any smell from it, you still have to distance yourself arba amot from it. You can't stand next to it and say Shema and say, well, it's in my back. I don't see it. I don't smell it. So who's counting? You can't say that because it's within your machaneh, and that's not considered machaneh kadosh. And the reason for arba amot, right? It's the Chafetz Chaim tichtiv, the pasuk in Devarim that says vaya machaneh kadosh, and the Gemara says this. This is a Gemara in Masechet Eruvin Daf Nun Aleph. The Gemara there says shemachaneh shel adam hu arba amot. The Gemara is discussing the halachot of Eruvin, of course, but the Gemara says that your immediate domain is 4 amot around you. Now, there's a whole machloket how to count the 4 amot. Do you do a circle around the person, or do you do 4 amot from each side and then circle around that? It's a little bit of a question, but for simplifying the sugya, we'll say a 4 amot radius, right? So says the Gemara, says the Shulchan Aruch rather. ואם יגיע ריח רע מהצואה בתוך 4 אמותיו, הרי אין כל מקום חנייתו בקדושה. If any place, any inch within your 4 amot radius could smell the tzoah, then your whole machaneh is not kadosh. Your makom chaniya is not kadosh. Therefore, hence you have to distance yourself 4 amot from the place that the smell ends. Now, the Kaf Chaim says we find arba amot of a person being koneh for him. In the halachot of kinyanim, also there's a concept of arba amotav shel adav konot. So you see that this is considered my extension. It's my extension. 4 amot around me is my extension, and therefore it's considered like my domain, my reshut, my immediate chanaya is my 4 amot, and this is considered me being there. And therefore, if it's me being there, Zak Kaf Chaim, it is considered not kadosh if any of that 4 amot radius could feel the smell of a tzoah. Okay, that's an additional explanation from Yaakov Chaim Sofer. Now, how about if I spray some air freshener in the place so I am not smelling any bad smell? Take my cologne, or air freshener, and I smell it, and I said, now there's no smell. Why? There's no smell.
No, the smell is still there. You just covered it up.
Still in your machaneh. So let's imagine I put enough that my whole machaneh smells like the dollar store air freshener or one of the fancier ones, right? So is it the fact that I can't smell anything bad good enough? Or would we say, like Ronnie just said, that, well, it's covered, but it's there. You covered it. You overpowered the bad smell right now, but still there. So therefore, it should be a problem, right? There are air fresheners that actually would fight the bad odor. Yeah, that's more sophisticated air fresheners, and there is such a thing. Right, so that it actually has a nafkamina, because the Mordechai Eliyahu alav shalom, he writes that even though that you quote unquote got rid of the bad odor, it's still there. You just covered it, and therefore it will be a problem still. It's asur to read it because the tzoah is uncovered. If the tzoah would be covered, and you got rid of the smell, then you will be allowed to. But when the source of it is there, even though that you overpowered the smell is still considered to be there, and you wait 5 minutes when the air freshener wears off, right? Then the smell is going to be there. So still is going to be a problem because it's in the same domain with you, and it is emanating bad smell still. So you covering it does not help. Whereas if you would cover the tzoah, then you would be also away from the 4 amot, and not smell because you sprayed it, then we'll be good. Now, that becomes a question for what Kaha said right now, which again is a more complicated question. We're not going to get into that at this moment. So that is one piece of Mishna Berurah. Now, Melo'ena, why do you have to go at night to the place that you would have been able to see it during the day, or when it's in front of you during the day? You have to distance yourself as much that you can no longer see that Tzoah. Says the Mishna Berurah, I'm a primigadim shekatav l'rashba דווקא דיבור אסור בתוך ולא אליו, אבל להרהר בדברי תורה מותר אם הוא חוץ ל400 מהקום שקלה הריח. So Pri Megadim has a chidush. He says to say divrei Torah, ervat dibur, by the Erva we spoke about this, to speak divrei Torah is asur when you could still see a soah. But to think of divrei Torah is no problem because your machane is kadosh, right? No problem with thinking, and you're not smelling it. So therefore, you will be good to go. Now, say what? Well, shower is a little different because you have, if you have a place that it's considered halachic bathroom, you cannot be lenient. Again, a shower that's considered the bathroom, no. A shower that's considered harvadia, for instance, this becomes a little complicated because it's machloket harvadia or the sion. The ambatya pratit, let's say a bath, right? A private bath in your home, no shower pouring down, right? Harvadia holds that's mutar. You could think of the Torah, no problem really. It's okay. Rabbi Shlomo holds that the makom of the bathtub itself is considered a halacha like bathroom, so you can't do it. But on the other hand, Rabbi Shlomo holds that our toilet seats, our toilet situation, inside the asla, inside the stall, is a problem. But if you cover it, the surrounding area in the room is not a problem necessarily. So you could do the Tat Yadayim in that room, even without having a Surat HaPetach necessarily, right? But as Chacham Ovadia disagrees with that. It says our Batei Kisei is not like Bet Kisei Shel Parsai, and it becomes much more complicated. So again, this is a sugya that we have discussed already earlier on in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. We're not going to go back to that right now, but it's important to note that the Rashba holds that anything that's outside your 4 amot is not considered a machaneh for you. It's not machanecha. Machanecha is 4 amot. Zehu. And according to the Rashba, would be much more lenient over here because you could think of Divrei Torah, it's not in your machaneh. But the Or Etzion, Rabbi Shaul wants to argue that even according to the Rashba, you could still say that when I could see it in front of my eyes is a problem even outside the Dalet Amod, even outside the 4 Amod, because it is considered still my machaneh because of Lo Yira'eh. And according to this, comes out that even according to the Rashba, when you're in the same domain, when you're in the same room as the Tzoah, you will have a problem of Vaya Machanecha Kadosh if you could see the Tzoah, even though that it is farther than 4 amot from the place that Reach stops. So therefore, Lachatchila, at least according to the Or Etzion, a person should be Machmir. We'll B'ezrat Hashem discuss some more details of this in the days to come.